Does the Bible say anything about the abolition of mercy? It is the night of September 30, 1973. The flickering screens of America's TV sets are bringing the nation its nightly entertainment. On one of the channels, the Sunday night movie is playing. We see a gang of young thugs roaming the streets. They come across some of the forgotten people of the city, alcoholics who sleep in doorways, winos who rummage through garbage cans for food. On a sadistic impulse, they decide to have some fun. They douse the poor creatures with gasoline, strike a match, then roar with laughter as they watch the human torches writhe in agony. Now, while millions of viewers may have thought of this as entertainment, to a few watchers, it was inspiration. 2 days later, as 25-year-old Evelyn Wagler was returning with a can of gasoline to her stalled car on a Boston street, she was surrounded by 6 delinquents. She was beaten, dragged to a vacant lot, and ordered to empty the gasoline can over herself. After tossing a lighted match, the boys ran from the scene. A few hours later, Evelyn Wagler died in a Boston hospital. 3 weeks later, another teenage group reenacted the same scene from that same Sunday night movie on a Miami street by pouring lighter fluid over 3 winos sleeping behind a vacant building. As the derelicts burst into flames, their screams mingled with the hilarious laughter of the teenagers in a macabre chorus. Unfortunately, these are not isolated cases. Your Bible says that the hearts of men everywhere on the planet are desperately wicked. The headlines are sprinkled with other examples of the almost hypnotic influence of television, violence, on a lunatic fringe in our society. The Airline Pilots Association recognizes this problem. After every dramatic depiction of a hijacking on TV, a spate of attempted real-life hijackings is to be expected. In 1966, Rod Serling's film Doomsday Flight was shown on national television. In the film, a terrorist skyjacker places a bomb on an airplane set to go off if the plane dips below a certain altitude. After the plane was airborne, a man phoned the company offering to reveal the bomb's hiding place in exchange for a huge ransom. Now, before its first on-air showing, the Airline Pilots Association vigorously objected to the film for fear some lunatic would be inspired to imitate it. They were ignored. Before the film was over, a bomb threat was phoned to an airline. Within 24 hours, 4 more phone threats were made. And by the end of the week, 8 more such calls were received by assorted airlines. 5 years later, the same film, was shown in Australia with the same result. Qantas Airlines finally had to pay $500,000 in ransom to protect the lives of the 116 passengers on board a flight to Hong Kong. This is the tragic result of television violence on that marginal segment of the population that is criminally inclined. But what about normal kids? What do the scientific studies show? Will violence and aggression on the screen induce children to become more violent in real life? Walters and Llewellyn Thomas devised a test to determine if viewing a violent film would induce a young person to inflict pain on society, on another person. A group of high school boys and girls were shown a film scene of a knife fight. Another group saw a film picturing adolescents engaged in constructive activities. Both before and after the film, the participants in the experiment were told to give an electric shock to another person as punishment for making errors on a learning test. Now, those who saw the film with violent content were invariably willing to give stronger shocks after seeing the film than before seeing it. They were also more aggressive than the group that had seen the constructive film. The question: is this kind of aggressive behavior retained more than a few minutes? Studies by David Hicks have demonstrated long-term retention of learned aggression. 2 groups of preschool children were shown a film with aggressive content. Then researchers allowed one group to go for 6 months without any further reminder of what they had seen in the 10-minute film. No follow-up took place with the second group for 8 months. It was discovered that both groups of children who had seen the aggressive 10-minute film reenacted nearly half of the hostile actions they had seen months previously. A long-term study by the researchers at the University of Illinois involved one set of 400 children over the course of more than 20 years. Dr. L. Roel Huisman and Dr. Leonard Iran found that those kids who watched significant amounts of TV violence at age 8 were consistently more likely to commit violent crimes or to engage in child or spouse abuse at age 30. When publishing their findings in 1984, the doctors wrote, "We believe that heavy exposure to televised violence is one of the causes of aggressive behavior, crime, and violence in society. Television violence affects youngsters of all ages, of both genders, and at all socioeconomic levels and all levels of intelligence. It cannot be denied or explained away." Professor George Comstock of the University of Syracuse reviewed research on TV and film violence in a 1988 book, Youth Violence. He found that a great majority of these studies indicate harmful effects. Dr. Victor Klein of the Psychology Department of the University of Utah contends that it is hardly a coincidence that the United States is the most violent advanced society in the world, and that it also has the highest rate of media violence of any nation. Klein states, "I do not think that any fair reviewer can deny that the media are one important contributor to the violence problems in our society." Klein says further, "Repeated viewing of violence also desensitizes the observer. It becomes, with repeated viewing, more acceptable. We lose the capacity to empathize with the victim." Several generations of American children have now been brought up on a diet of sadistic entertainment. No wonder violence is at an all-time high. Now, Americans tend to worry about environmental hazards, ecology, asbestos that can damage the lungs, or global warming. Yet they totally ignore pernicious programming that can damage the psyche. Even toxins that pose marginal danger to the body are the objects of vigorous protests. Friend, how can we be so naive and complacent to those mental and emotional toxins that are destroying the national soul? You know, a generation ago, the great biblical research scholar C.S. Lewis, in his book, That Hideous Strength, suggested that the first step in the ultimate abolition of man, by which he meant the removal of man's moral nature, would be a deconditioning process that would consist of the stifling of all deep-set repugnancies. Lewis's fear is becoming a reality. Horror films often juxtapose scenes of hideous violence with tranquil scenes from everyday life, a practice similar to the desensitization techniques used in psychotherapy to help people overcome phobias. Thus, the movie industry is curing millions of young Americans of their distaste for violence and gore. Today's violent movies are written in such a way that they invoke not pity for the victim, but the emotion of pleasure and hilarity. Screen violence now, writes Michael Medved, is used primarily to invite the viewer to enjoy the feel of killing, beating, mutilating. I suspect one of the most effective ways to expunge compassion from the human heart is a steady diet of violent movies. Now today, the media moguls have replaced the industrial robber barons as the chief exploiters of society's weaknesses. Hollywood, you see, is strip mining America's soul, writes syndicated columnist Don Feeder, like drug kingpins. TV executives are making a killing, marketing poison. It matters not into whose veins it flows or its corrosive impact on your society, as long as the blood money keeps rolling in. But friend, there is some good news. Some of the negative publicity concerning violence is beginning to take effect. Various citizen groups have put pressure on advertisers by using the honorable American tradition of the boycott and by writing letters to sponsors. Some of television's heaviest violence buyers have agreed to cooperate in reducing the avalanche of gratuitous violence heard and seen over the airwaves. Indeed, Hollywood is feeling so much pressure that it is striking back with full-page advertisements protesting its right to freedom of speech while supporting lawsuits against these advocacy groups with the intent of restricting their freedom of speech. That's ironic, isn't it? Tobacco companies still deny that cigarettes cause cancer, and Hollywood still denies that video violence breeds real-life mayhem. Well, I don't buy it. And friend, this is a wake-up call to Christians and people everywhere to unmask the deadly corrosion of TV violence.